as a good, suitable intro for me to these videos, because I know many of you know that I spent most of my adult life, I say most, a good chunk of it, in New Zealand, Aotearoa. And I often, as I live here in Canada, think about, do I miss it? What do I miss about it? And thought I'd talk about that today. I've been in Canada for, oh, you know what? 7 years. Probably exactly 7. This is the 6th of June. I'm pretty sure it was the 6th of June in 2015. Maybe the 7th. Anyway. And we left Auckland when we decided, probably a year before, maybe even a little bit more than that, our kids were born. We don't have any family in New Zealand, that type of thing, so we thought that it would be good to move closer to our family, which is obviously, my family is in Scotland and my wife's family from here. So we made the decision to emigrate. In my wife's case, move back, but in my case, emigrate again, which I like, because I feel like you only live once. When an opportunity like that comes up, you should take it. I love New Zealand, and I do miss New Zealand, but there's a few things I don't miss. But one of the things that in our situation was, me and my wife lived there by ourselves. We had friends, but no family, no mums and dads nearby, no mothers and father-in-laws, no grandparents nearby, just me and my wife. We didn't realise it at the time, but because we were left on our own to do whatever we want, we were really, really free to do stuff. Really free, not physically free, because I'm physically free right now, but kind of mentally free, you know, like there was never any, oh, what would my mum think, or what would my dad think if I buy this, or go here, or do that, or whatever. And it complemented really well with New Zealand culture, because New Zealanders are positive to a fault. Like, they are so positive looking. Now, I'm being from Scotland, arguably, I would admit that my culture can be very negative. It can be fun, and it's a great culture, and I love being Scottish, but I always felt like the outsider there. I've talked about this in previous videos. New Zealand was the type of place where if you wanted to go and do something, you very rarely met resistance. If you wanted to try something new, you very rarely meet resistance. It would usually be, oh, that sounds awesome, yeah, do it. Whether it might be, I don't know, trying a new career, or buying an unusual house, or a strange car, or starting up a new side business, or something like that. Which is another interesting point, that I know I think most of my friends in New Zealand have a side hustle, like it's just standard. You know, they all just have a side hustle. They have this thing they want to do, this passion they want to follow, and nobody questions it. It's just normal. And I've always been a bit like that too, so I fit into that very well, I felt. Now, New Zealanders can be positive. I'll briefly talk about positive to a fault. What do I mean by that? Because New Zealand, like many places, has problems, right? Housing is unaffordable, wages can be an issue, the quality of the houses can be a real issue. I've talked about that before. But they'll still be positive. They'll be positive about the negative stuff. So I'll say, look, I love it here, it's great, but the houses are bloody freezing and covered in mould. And they will defend that. A lot of them would. It's starting to change now. I know people who would never be able to afford a house in a million years. And they know that, so they go down to the nearest cafe, buy a nice big coffee, and just enjoy the lifestyle. Now that's great, but it's also like the priorities are wrong. They're going for kind of style over substance. So that's briefly a couple of things that I don't like. And where I am now, it's not like that. But where I am now can be quite negative. People can be quite depressive about society and politics. New Zealanders, I always found, were not like that at all. I would much rather be positive to a fault and be over positive, if that makes sense, than be relentlessly negative. And I miss that about New Zealand. Lack of judgment. Since I moved here, I've felt, probably more so because we were on our own and now we're near family. And don't get me wrong, love being near family. But I definitely feel judgment. Like scrutiny. When we were shopping for a house, we looked at so many houses. Because there was always something wrong. Eventually we just had to leave the parents at home and go and look at houses we wanted. It was what we should have done in the first place. And then we found the right house, and here we are. It took a long time. We have a joke with my real estate agent, who is actually Scottish. He showed us more houses than any other client. So yeah. So in New Zealand, there's a phone company called 2 Degrees. They're called that because rather than the 6 degrees of separation that you often have in other places, New Zealand has 2 degrees of separation. That's what we all call it. And it definitely seems to be the case. Oddly enough, and a certain New Zealand ASM artist that you may or may not know, I'm sure you do know, who goes by the name of Atlas. I'm sure you all know Atlas. We've never met, but I discovered that we both know at least one person in common. It's just, and that's very, very, very common, I find, in New Zealand. It's like this little gang or this little club, and you're never, like, I used to work in Wellington, in the entertainment industry, and I'd go to Auckland, and Auckland is really far away from Wellington, but the amount of people who knew my boss and my colleagues, I'm like, oh yeah, I know them. I'm like, how do you know them? Like, it's a 10-hour drive away, you know. It's the other side of the island, halfway down the country. But it's just so normal, and I like that. There was a very close-knit thing going on, and that's important when you live in the South Pacific, in what is arguably the most isolated country in the world, because there's an attraction. One of the reasons I went there in the first place was the attraction of being isolated away from everybody else and away from Europe and civilization, I suppose, and all the bullshit that comes with that. But there is also an isolation, a negative side of the isolation, which after a while can really get to you, you know, because See, when I first went there, it was always all eyes on the media and stuff would talk about places far away from Britain, Scotland, Britain, whatever. And then when you get to New Zealand, you realise they're actually looking back the other way. A lot of their media is focused on Britain or Europe or North America, because there's just not that much happening there on a daily basis to have a lot of news headlines. But that is also a good thing. I miss that. Really miss that. So, what do I miss about New Zealand? What's the point of this video? Oh, yeah, that's right. So, I guess I miss being part of a gang, like a nice gang of people who share a geographic area which is unique, beautiful, and clean. A lot less litter. That's one thing I noticed. I mean, you do get litter, but for some reason there's a lot less of it there. At least noticeably so, where I lived. But oddly enough, being an overseas Kiwi makes you almost more of a Kiwi, because one of the characteristics of New Zealanders is to leave and eventually go back. So I will hopefully go back one day. I really do hope so. I miss social events, barbecues, everybody showing up with food. You bring your own plate full of food and you sort of contribute. It's relaxing. It's, you know, one thing it's hard to explain it all, but I'm going to explain part of it like this. One time when I was in Wellington, I had to call up the tax office. Now, I'd only been in New Zealand for a couple of years at this point, so I was still fully in my Scottish / UK mindset when it came to, you know, you have to call the tax office when I'm going to be on the phone for hours. I called up the tax office, dreading it. Can't remember why I was calling them. And I was just trying to sort out my tax number or something. And it rang and somebody answered. Didn't even put me on hold, just answered right away. Hello, Inland Revenue. I was like, oh, how's it going? I need to get my whatever. And within 3 minutes I was done. That's really common in New Zealand. At least it was. I hope it still is. To phone up, like, you know, government services and that, and just have somebody answer right away, sort it out, and that's it. It was so good. And plus, no checks, as in paper checks. I haven't seen one of those in decades. They still use them here in Canada, and every time somebody asks me about a check, I'm like, mate, I haven't seen a check since like the late 90s. Just, I'll just e-transfer it to you or whatever, you know. New Zealand had all that way back in the early 2000s. Like, nobody was writing checks. They were much more progressive, forward thinking, not just in terms of politics and that, but or social stuff, but also to do with technology, you know, like debit cards and stuff like that. You know, like we were just getting them in Scotland before I left. New Zealand had already had them for years. So it's in internet banking and stuff like that. It was already in place. All that stuff was in place. So I found that all that stuff was just really easy. So paying bills, it was just like, it's fine. Here I find it's still a work in progress. It's getting better, but it's still a mishmash of direct debit, checks, online banking. It's kind of a bit of a puzzle. And then you've they've got like, well, in Canada you have the imperial metric system, so just to go completely off topic, and New Zealand is all metric, like 100% metric. So yeah, which is funny for me because I came from an imperial society, so I totally adopted the New Zealand way of weights and measures, like instantly. Yeah, I'm gonna make another video about what I don't miss about New Zealand, because there are a few things, but I wanted to be kind to my former home. Still is my home in a way. Like, I am a New Zealand citizen, and when I travel, when I go around, when I approach stuff politically or with an adult opinion, whatever, I do so based on what I learned there, not so much what I learned in Scotland, although Scotland is my kind of foundation. So politically, I'd consider myself, left-wing, progressive, but with caveats. A lot of people think of New Zealand as a very left-wing, progressive place, and it is, but it also isn't. New Zealand can be actually quite right-wing, believe it or not, but without the jingoistic side, because it's a small country. They don't manifest that right-wingedness in any sort of bad way, like in a affecting others way. It's more to do with on an individual basis. Like, New Zealanders are very hard business people, and things can be quite expensive, and they find new and creative ways to get that out of you. So, something that I often think about. Yeah, I'm losing track. I'm still recovering from you know what. But anyway, I hope this was slightly interesting to you. I'm going to do more videos like these, just to keep the channel alive. But yeah, I'm a proud New Zealander. Love New Zealand. I hope to go back sooner rather than later. See all my pals, and maybe even, I don't know, retire there one day. We'll see. Yeah, that's it for me from now. I hope you're all doing great. Take care, and talk to you soon.